Ashkenazi Jews are not from the Middle East. They didn't come from ancient Israel. They are descendants of the Khazars, a Turkic people from the steppes of Central Asia who converted to Judaism in the 9th century. Their genetic claim to the Levant? Manufactured. Their history? A story told by people who needed one. He even names a scientist, Dr. Aaron L. Reich, a real geneticist, a real paper, published in a real journal. The audience has no way of knowing what the actual genome-wide data says. That's the point. Stay with me, because this next part is the reason this video exists. Every major outlet ran the story. Historians called it debunked. The ADL issued a response. Everyone agreed. This is a lie, and they're right. It is. But here's what nobody is saying. The lie is not the most dangerous part of this story. Now, what's dangerous is what the DNA actually reveals when you go deeper than either side of this argument is willing to go. Because it doesn't just prove who Jews are, it proves something else entirely. Something that makes everyone in this debate uncomfortable. In 2022, a team of researchers, led by Dr. Shimon Waldman at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, working alongside Dr. Edoin Harney at Harvard Medical School, published something that should have ended this conversation permanently. They sequenced genome-wide data from 33 Jewish individuals buried in 14th century Erfurt, Germany, a community that was massacred in 1349, blamed for the Black Death, killed in a pogrom, buried together in the ground. Their DNA survived, and when Waldman's team read it, they found the same genetic signature as modern Ashkenazi Jews. Well, the same founder event, already complete, already fixed, before the massacre, before the lie needed to exist. If you've ever wondered where people really come from, and I mean really, subscribe. Because this is only the beginning. The question isn't whether the lie is wrong. We know it's wrong. The question is, what was it always trying to bury? Because what it was trying to bury was already 4,000 years old before anyone in that podcast studio was born. Before we go further, I want to know something from you specifically. Has anyone in your family ever been told a story about where your ancestors came from, and you later found out it wasn't quite right, or couldn't be proven? Drop your country and your family's origin story in the comments, because by the end of this video, I'll show you why that question matters more than you think. What they were trying to bury was already 4,000 years old, 5 archaeological sites across the southern Levant, 73 human bodies, remains dated as far back as 2,400 BCE. That's more than 800 years before the story of the Exodus, 700 years before the name Israel appears in any Egyptian inscription anywhere on Earth. The researchers who dug this up weren't looking for Jews. They were looking at the people who came before the people who would eventually become Jews, before the category even existed. Dr. Liran Agranat-Tamir at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, working with Dr. David Reich at Harvard Medical School, published their findings in the Journal Cell in 2020. And what they found in those 73 ancient bodies was this. Every single genome could be modeled as a mixture of 2 populations. 1, Neolithic farmers who had lived in the Levant for thousands of years already. 2, migrants related to communities from the Zagros Mountains in what is now Iran and Iraq, who had been arriving gradually over centuries. The so-called Canaanites of the Bible were themselves already the result of thousands of years of mixing. The people later called Israelites didn't arrive into an empty land. They emerged from one that had been continuously occupied and continuously changing since before recorded history. Hold on to that, because it's about to mean something completely different. Here's the part nobody's ready for. When Reich and Agranat-Tamir compared those 73 Bronze Age genomes to modern populations, they found that modern Jews and modern Arabs, both groups, share more than half their ancestry with those same ancient Canaanite communities. Not with the Israelites specifically, with the Canaanites. The people the biblical narrative describes as enemies. The people described in some passages as displaced, conquered, in places destroyed. The DNA doesn't care about those narratives. It says, these are the same people. At the ancient city of Megiddo, the place that gives us the word Armageddon, archaeologists found a Bronze Age burial from around 1350 BCE. One individual, elite burial, grave goods from Egypt, Cyprus, and the Aegean, all in one tomb. International, cosmopolitan, 3,300 years ago. And the genome of that person, the same Zagros Canaanite blend found everywhere else in the dataset, in the same profile a Tel Aviv genetics lab would recognize today. The genetic thread connecting modern Jews to this land is real. It's unbroken. It goes back 4,000 years, but it's shared, equally, documentably, with people that modern political discourse treats as newcomers. The DNA doesn't recognize that border, and in 2022, when Waldman's team read those medieval Erfurt genomes, they found something in the data that nobody expected, an ancestral component in the Ashkenazi genome they couldn't assign to any known source population. Not Middle Eastern, not European, something else, still unidentified, still inside millions of living people. That unidentified signal has a context now, and the context is the Rhine Valley. Somewhere between the years 1100 and 1300 CE, a small group of Jews arrived in what would become the cities of Mainz, Worms, and Speyer. Migrants from Mediterranean and Levantine diaspora communities moving through southern Europe. They settled, they built, they married, and something happened that no evolutionary biologist would have predicted. The population compressed into a number so small, it barely makes sense. Dr. Shay Carmi at Columbia University spent years on this specific question. In 2014, his team published the results in Nature Communications. They sequenced 128 Ashkenazi individuals at high depth. Then they calculated the effective founding population of the entire Ashkenazi Jewish world. The number was fewer than 350 people. Think about that. Or every Ashkenazi Jew alive today, all 10 million of them, descends from fewer than 350 individuals who were alive in medieval Europe. Genetically, they are approximately fourth or fifth cousins of each other, not symbolically, mathematically. Carmi's team found the ancestry was roughly half Middle Eastern and half European, with the European component entering primarily through women, likely Southern European women marrying into the community during the early formation period. This discovery was made in 2014. Almost nobody talked about what it actually implied, until now, because the medieval Ashkenazi community didn't just go through one compression. They went through several: the Roman dispersal after 70 CE, the medieval founder event, and then 1349, Erfurt, Germany. So the Jewish community accused of poisoning wells during the Black Death, massacred, and when Waldman's 2022 team recovered their DNA from that burial site, they found Ashkenazi-specific disease variants already fixed in the population. Tay-Sachs markers, Gaucher markers, the genetic vulnerabilities that Ashkenazi Jews carry at elevated rates today. Those weren't created by the pogrom. They existed before it. The massacre was compressing a population that was already compressed. The Ashkenazi genome is not simply ancient. It is almost gone multiple times by human violence. And here is where it gets specific in a way that should make you pause. The Tay-Sachs mutation. The BRCA1 variant that raises breast cancer risk. And the inherited disorders that appear in Ashkenazi populations at rates 10 times higher than the general population, they are there because of that 350-person bottleneck. They are not diseases in the traditional sense. They are biological records of a near extinction. They are alive right now in people walking the streets of Brooklyn, Tel Aviv, Buenos Aires, carried forward without the carriers knowing the history encoded inside their own cells. The fossil record has an opponent, and he deserves better than dismissal. Dr. Aaron Reich. At the time, he was at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. In 2012, he published a paper in Genome Biology and Evolution. He wasn't writing propaganda, he was doing population genetics. His paper passed peer review at a serious journal. It's still indexed, it's still cited. And if we dismiss it without actually engaging it, we're doing exactly what he accused his critics of doing to him. So, let's engage it properly. Reich's argument runs like this. Ashkenazi Jews appear in Central and Eastern Europe in the 10th century with no clear documented migration trail from the Levant. They speak Yiddish, a Germanic language, not Aramaic, not Hebrew. Certain Y chromosome haplogroups in Ashkenazi populations show elevated frequencies associated with Eastern Europe and the Caucasus. And when Reich compared Ashkenazi genomes to Armenian and Georgian populations as stand-ins for Khazar ancestry, the analysis suggested the Ashkenazi genome was a mixture of Near Eastern, Caucasian, and European components. He concluded The Khazarian origin hypothesis was supported. The Rhineland migration hypothesis was not. And yet, the data said the exact opposite of what he thought he'd proved. Here's where the hypothesis collapses from inside its own logic. Reich chose Armenians and Georgians as his Khazar genetic proxies, but Armenians and Georgians carry substantial ancestry from the Zagros mountain region, the exact same ancestral component found in those 73 Bronze Age Canaanite genomes from Agranat-Tamir and Reich's 2020 cell study. The populations Reich called Khazar proxies and the ancient Israelite population are genetically indistinguishable by the very components he was measuring. His test could not tell the difference between descended from Khazars and descended from people who happened to look genetically identical to ancient Israelites. The control population was wrong. The conclusion followed the control, not the truth. Then there's the R1, a haplogroup, the one Reich pointed to as a signature of steppe ancestry. When subsequent researchers drilled into the specific sub-branches of R1a in Ashkenazi populations, they found the relevant subclade distributed across Iranian Kurds, Azerbaijanis, and critically, non-Ashkenazi Jewish communities in Iran and Yemen, communities that had never set foot in Eastern Europe. A marker Reich read as steppe DNA turned out, at higher resolution, to be a Near Eastern marker that predated the Khazar Khanate by thousands of years. Actually, real quick, if you watched my last video, the one about 15 million Americans claiming Cherokee ancestry and what the DNA actually showed, you already saw this exact mechanism play out, a political need creating a genetic narrative. Did that change how you think about who gets to claim an ancestry? Drop it in the comments, because what comes next is where both those stories converge in a way I genuinely did not expect. The 2013 refutation by Bihar's team used over 500,000 genetic markers, not Y chromosome proxies. No Khazar signal anywhere. Carmi and Pe'er's 2014 Nature Communication study, no Khazar signal. Waldman's 2022 cell paper on the actual medieval Ashkenazi bodies from Erfurt, no Khazar signal. Every additional layer of data made the hypothesis less coherent. The problem was never evidence. The problem was that someone needed this question to stay open, and that someone was not Aaron Reich. The Khazar hypothesis wasn't born in a genetics laboratory. It was born 140 years ago in a specific European city, by people with a very specific interest in Jews having no geographic claim worth defending. Reich didn't invent this hypothesis. He inherited it. And the people who handed it to him are the most important part of this story, and nobody in these debates is talking about them. What Reich inherited was 140 years old. Paris. Ernest Renan, French philologist, member of the Académie Française, the most celebrated religious historian in Europe, stands before the Sorbonne and delivers a lecture. He doesn't use the word Khazar. He doesn't need to. He simply argues that Jews are not a nation. They are a religion wearing the costume of a nation. Their connection to any specific land is sentimental, he says, not historical, not genetic. The most prestigious academic platform in the world. What's the most elegant possible way to sever a people from a geography? But here's where it gets strange, because the missing evidence isn't hidden. It simply doesn't exist yet. The formal Khazar hypothesis enters the academic literature around the same decade, the 1880s. At the same moment, European nationalist movements are grappling with a question they didn't want to ask out loud. If Jews could claim an ancient, verifiable origin in a specific land, what did that mean for everything that was being done to them in Europe? The hypothesis that Jews weren't really from anywhere particular, that their identity was a religious invention rather than an ancestral fact, was not politically neutral. It never was. Jump forward to 1976. Arthur Koestler, a Hungarian Jewish intellectual, one of the most important writers of the 20th century, publishes a book called The 13th Tribe. He argues that Ashkenazi Jews descend from Khazar converts, and he tells you exactly why he's making this argument. If Ashkenazi Jews are not ethnically Semitic, he writes, then anti-Semitism cannot be classified as racial hatred, and Zionism loses its biblical foundation. He thought he was dismantling a dangerous religious nationalism. He thought he was being honest. He handed a loaded weapon to everyone who would spend the next 50 years arguing that Jews have no valid claim to exist anywhere at all. Khazar died in 1983. His book is still in print. It's been cited in political documents by groups who explicitly call for the elimination of the Jewish state. It circulates in white nationalist spaces. It was quoted, accurately, in a 2026 podcast that opened this video. A Jewish intellectual's act of self-examination became the primary sourcing document for people who would have despised him. Here is the genomic reality underneath all of this. The definitive test of the Khazar hypothesis, sequencing confirmed Khazar ancient DNA and comparing it to Ashkenazi genomes, has never been completed. Not because of suppression, because steppe nomads from the 7th to 10th century don't preserve DNA well. The relevant burial sites exist. Researchers know where they are. The usable ancient DNA has not been successfully extracted, so the hypothesis cannot be definitively falsified. And for anyone who needs the question to stay open, an absence that science cannot close is functionally equivalent to winning. The lie was designed this way. Not by Reich, not by Khazar, by 140 years of motivated reasoning that shaped the question long before either of them arrived to answer it. Migration is the word the genome keeps coming back to. Rosh Hashanah, Israel, 2025. A neighborhood built for people who arrived in 380 flights over 16 months. Operation Magic Carpet, 1949 to 1950. 49,000 Yemenite Jews airlifted out of Yemen and brought to a brand new country that had existed for less than 2 years. These are Mizrahi Jews, the group whose genome sits closest to the Bronze Age Canaanite baseline, the least disrupted, the most continuous. Old men in this neighborhood carry a Y chromosome haplogroup called J1, a marker that archaeogenomicists associate with the Bronze Age expansion out of the Arabian Peninsula. And they carry something 3,000 years old. They don't know it has a scientific name. Agranat-Tamir and Reich's 2020 cell study found something in the southern Levantine dataset that goes beyond the Israelite and Canaanite picture. A secondary ancestral component, arriving gradually during the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age, roughly 1200 to 900 BCE. A contribution related to Bronze Age Arabian and East African populations, increasing as you move southward through the region. This wave left its genetic frequency in every modern Levantine population. It left no text, no inscription, no migration story, no name. A people whose descendants are everywhere, and who exist only as a percentage in a dataset. This isn't just ancient history. This frequency is in your DNA right now, wherever you're watching from. This unnamed population contributed to the genomes of ancient Israelites, ancient Canaanites, and the ancestors of modern Palestinians in equal measure. The Y haplogroup J1 lineage that runs through Yemenite Jewish men, Bedouin men, Palestinian men from the hills of Hebron. It represents the same anonymous Bronze Age migration. One group of people, 3 modern identities, 0 shared memory of the common origin. A 2013 study of Lebanese populations found that J1 was distributed almost equally across Muslim, Christian, and Druze communities, with only minor variation from much later mixing events. The same genetic substrate, different prayers, different histories, different flags. One unnamed people from 3,000 years ago. Shai and their descendants are sitting across from each other at checkpoints and borders and have no idea they are looking at something that was once the same. The political implication is not comfortable, but the science doesn't soften it. The people on both sides of the contemporary conflict in the Levant share more than half their DNA with the same Bronze Age ancestors, which means the question of who belongs to this land was never a genetic question. The genome simply makes it too clear to keep pretending otherwise. And then there's something in the data that even the researchers flag as unexplained. One ancestral component in the Bronze Age Levantine dataset that doesn't match the Neolithic farmers, doesn't match the Zagros migrants, doesn't match the Arabian expansion. It belongs to no known source population. A group that arrived, she contributed and left nothing except a frequency distribution. A people with no name, no burial site that's been found, no text that mentions them, only a percentage, sitting inside every population descended from this region. including people who have no idea they are descended from this region. Everyone includes a group that nobody in this story has mentioned yet, and their absence from this debate is the most telling silence of all. Mount Gerizim, Nablus, West Bank. Right now, in 2025, approximately 800 Samaritans remain. That's the total. 800 people, the smallest continuously practicing religious community in the world with an unbroken lineage. They have not married outside their four-family clans for over 2,500 years, by religious law, by choice, by survival. So geneticists had wanted their DNA for decades. And when Dr. Peter Öffner at the University of Regensburg in Germany, working with Dr. Noah Rosenberg at Stanford, finally published the analysis in Human Biology in 2013, the result was a problem for everyone who thought genetics drew clean lines between peoples. There are three things this finding reveals. The third one changes the entire story. First, the Samaritan patrilineal Y chromosomes cluster tightly within the same haplogroup distribution found in ancient Israelite populations. Second, 4 of their 6 family lineages carry Y chromosome profiles, one single mutation removed from what geneticists call the Cohen modal haplotype, the marker associated with Jewish priestly lineage, the Kohanim, tracing back to a common male ancestor at approximately the time of the First Temple. And third, and this is the part, the researchers date the Samaritan male lineage to a common ancestor at approximately the time of the Assyrian conquest of the Northern Kingdom. 722 BCE, the moment the Bible says the northern Israelites were scattered. The Samaritans were never scattered, they stayed. Now think about who the Samaritans are theologically. When Jewish exiles returned from Babylonian captivity in the 6th century BCE, they refused to allow the Samaritans to participate in rebuilding the temple. The Samaritans were condemned as impure, half-breeds, the people who had stayed behind and intermarried with Assyrian settlers. Their version of the Torah was dismissed. Their holy site, Mount Gerizim, was rejected in favor of Jerusalem. For 2,500 years, Jewish tradition has treated the Samaritans as inauthentic Israelites, the people who got it wrong, the people who don't really belong to the story. The people condemned as inauthentic Israelites are, by Y chromosome analysis, more continuously Israelite than the communities that condemned them. The returning exiles, the ones who got to define what authentic Judaism meant, had spent 2 or 3 generations in Babylon. They had absorbed Babylonian culture, Babylonian language, Babylonian admixture. The people they rejected as impure had simply stayed on the land for 400 more years, and the DNA reflects exactly that. The wrong Jews carry the oldest male lineage. The DNA never received notice of the schism. Every year on that hillside, the Samaritans perform a Passover sacrifice, a live sacrifice. The only community on earth performing this ritual in continuous lineage since the Iron Age. Israeli soldiers provide security below, tourists photograph from the road. Nobody standing on that hillside has been told that the Y chromosomes on both sides of the barrier are, by every genomic measure, almost the same. And then, one more thing. In 2020, a genomic study of Italian populations identified a community in southern Italy carrying an anomalously high frequency of Near Eastern ancestry markers, markers consistent specifically with the ancient Levantine Israelite genomic profile. No Jewish community in those areas' historical records, no documented migration, no oral tradition, just the signal, sitting inside Italian families who have no idea what their genome is holding. No idea. That phrase keeps appearing, not always innocently. That Italian population anomaly has no published follow-up study. The signal appears in a 2013 dataset, flagged, noted, recommended for further investigation, and then left in the supplementary appendix of a paper that has been accessed by the metadata fewer than 20 times in a decade. This is not a conspiracy. It is something more mundane, and in some ways, more troubling. It's the ordinary process by which a finding that implicates too many people in too many directions gets quietly deprioritized, not hidden, just left in Table S4, where nobody looks. What they found next didn't make headlines, and that absence is more interesting than any headline. In 2022, Dr. Waldman's team at Hebrew University published the Erfurt study in Cell. Open access, widely read, widely cited. It confirmed the Ashkenazi founder event predated the 14th century. It showed the medieval Erfurt community was already genetically identical to modern Ashkenazi Jews. It answered one question definitively, but it did not address a specific and strange finding that other researchers had noted: Ashkenazi-specific founder mutations appearing at detectable frequencies in non-Jewish Southern European populations. People with no Jewish ancestry in their family records, no oral history. The mutations just there. Nobody has published a study asking why. Let's be honest about what we're saying. Science moves slowly. Peer review takes 12 to 18 months on average. Follow-up funding depends on institutional priorities, not on what's intellectually urgent. So the absence of a follow-up study to the Italian anomaly is not proof of suppression. It is proof of how the system works, which is that what gets studied next is shaped by what's politically safe to ask, what's fundable, and how much noise a finding makes in its first year. The Italian signal made almost no noise, so it waited. Aaron L. Reich, the Khazar hypothesis scientist we looked at in segment 4, has documented cases of peer reviewers raising what he calls political rather than methodological objections to his subsequent work. His critics, including Doron Bahar at Rambam Healthcare Campus in Haifa, are also Jewish. This is not external censorship of Jewish genetic science. It is scientists in violent disagreement over methodology, in a field where the stakes of being wrong are not just academic. The political charge sits on top of what is genuinely an epistemological fight about which reference populations are valid and which conclusions they support. What is truly absent from the record is not a suppressed paper. It's an entire category of evidence, the successfully sequenced genome of a confirmed Khazar period individual from the 7th to 10th century CE. Without it, the definitive test cannot be run. The step doesn't preserve DNA well at that depth. The absence isn't malicious. It's geological. But for a hypothesis that requires the question to stay permanently open, a gap that science cannot currently close is worth more than any published paper. The hypothesis lives in the absence, and the absence may not be filled for years. Tay-Sachs disease. A child inherits 2 copies of a mutated gene. And the myelin sheath around their nerve cells breaks down. There is no reversal. The deterioration is complete. The child dies, typically before age 5. Ashkenazi Jews carry the Tay-Sachs founder mutation at a frequency roughly 10 times higher than the general population. And that number, 10 times, is not a mystery of nature. It is a historical record. It is the Rhine Valley. The year 1200, give or take a generation. A founding population of fewer than 350 people. And after them, centuries of violence that kept the population compressed. The disease is a fossil of a massacre. The frequency is the fingerprint of what was done. The BRCA1 variant, the one associated with elevated breast and ovarian cancer risk, appears in Ashkenazi women at a rate 3 to 4 times higher than in other populations. In 2013, Angelina Jolie wrote an op-ed disclosing her BRCA1 status and her decision to have a preventive double mastectomy. Millions of people read it. She didn't mention Mainz. She didn't mention the Black Death. She didn't mention 1349. She was carrying a 700-year-old wound in her cells. And neither she nor the millions who read her story knew how it got there. These aren't just diseases. They are records, biological archives of what happens when a population is compressed into 350 people and then repeatedly targeted for destruction. And now, the last thing I want to show you, because this is the part of the DNA story that this debate almost never reaches. The same bottleneck that elevated disease risk also produced something else in the Ashkenazi genome: extreme relatedness. Every Ashkenazi Jew is approximately a 4th or 5th cousin of every other Ashkenazi Jew on Earth, mathematically. This means that when 6 million were murdered in the Holocaust, the Jewish people didn't just lose 6 million individuals. They lost a disproportionately large fraction of their entire genetic diversity, a second bottleneck, engineered by human decision, written permanently into the genome of every person who survived. The debate about who Jews really are genetically has been running for 140 years. It has been used to deny, to displace, to justify. And all the while, the actual answer was sitting in the data, not in the political argument about origins, but in the biological record of what was done to a people over the centuries. The genome doesn't just tell you where someone came from. Oh, it tells you what they survived. So here's where we are. The DNA says, the ancestors of modern Jews have been in the Levant, genetically traceable, for at least 4,000 years. The DNA says, modern Jews and modern Arabs share more than half that ancestry from the same Bronze Age population. The DNA says, the Samaritans, the people condemned as fake Israelites 2,500 years ago, carry the oldest male Israelite lineage still present in any living group. The DNA says, a medieval massacre in a German city left a biological wound that is still inside people alive today. And the Khazar hypothesis? Every independent genome-wide study, Behar, Carmi, Waldman, Agranat-Tamir, Reich, has found no step Turkic ancestry signature in the Ashkenazi genome, none. And the hypothesis has been tested with increasingly powerful tools each time. It has failed each time. It persists anyway, not because the science is uncertain, because the political need is not. Here is the thing that the data cannot answer. And I want to sit with this one because it matters. The Bronze Age Canaanite people, the unnamed ones, the ones who left no founding myth, the ones whose descendants are now on both sides of a wall in Jerusalem. They never called themselves Canaanites. That name came from outside. Their descendants never agreed on a single name either. Some of them became Israelites, some became Philistines, some became Phoenicians, some became the people we now call Palestinians, some became the communities we now call Jews. The genome cannot tell you which narrative is the right one, or because the genome predates every narrative by thousands of years. What genetics does, and this is both its power and its limit, is remove one layer of the argument. It says, you are not strangers to each other. Whatever happened between you happened between people who share a biological origin. It does not say who was right. It does not assign land. It does not validate any political claim. It simply says, you were here, together. Before the argument started, there is an ancestral component in the southern Levantine genome dataset that no research team has been able to model. Not Neolithic Levantine, not Zagros, not Arabian. Something that arrived and left no trace except a frequency. A people with no name, no text, no memory. And that component is inside the Jewish genome, the Arab genome, the Palestinian genome, the Samaritan genome, equally. Whatever they were, they didn't know they would become the center of the most contested piece of land in human history. They were just here. The war written in modern DNA is 4,000 years old. It has never resolved. The genome records every migration, every merger, every massacre, every survival. It records the Erfurt dead, with their disease mutations already fixed before the killing started. It records the 350 founders whose compression still echoes in 10 million bodies. It records the Samaritans on their mountain, carrying a lineage older than the argument about who they are. The lie that opened this video will still be circulating tomorrow, not because the science failed to answer it, because the science answered something the lie was never actually asking. Seeing, and the thing the lie was never asking, the thing it was always trying to prevent you from seeing, is that the people it was built to separate were never, by any biological measure, as separate as the lie needed them to be.